Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Nilanjan Sarkar, and I'm Deputy Director here at the South Asia Centre at the London School of Economics. A very warm welcome to all of you to this afternoon's event, another book discussion in our series Fact and Fiction, in which we choose a recently or relatively recently published book of topical interest to South Asia. And we have the author as well as a panel of discussants talking to us about the book. And I'm delighted to say that this afternoon's book is by Ayesha Jehangir and is titled Afghan Refugees, Pakistani Media and the State, The Missing Piece. I should also say that when I first read out the title, I was told that I should spell out peace, that it is P-E-A-C-E and not P-I-E-C-E. But then I also did think that actually both of them work, but it is P-E-A-C-E. The book looks at media narratives of Afghan refugees in Pakistan and the government's, especially in the context of the government's recent enforcement of forced repatriation of Afghan refugees. So it's very, very topical. It's very interesting for all of us to discuss, those who are interested in South Asia, not only directly, but even from a comparative perspective, and also those who are interested in media studies, and especially in today's world, where media has taken on a completely different meaning from what it used to be at one time. To be clear, the book about which you'll hear more just now from Ayesha, the author herself, Ayesha Jehangir, and the discussion focuses on media reportage in Pakistan. And that is the core focus of the book. The subject of that focus are Afghan refugees. I say this because we have had some emails where people asked why there were no Afghans invited to the panel to speak. And I wanted to clarify that this was the position from which we had approached the book, as well as who we wanted to invite to the panel. Okay, I won't talk more about the book because the author will speak. But before we get into discussing the book, I'd like to say a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined in and is watching literally from across the world, across time zones. And we are very, very grateful to you for making the time to join this afternoon's discussion, which we are sure will be very interesting and animated, and we hope you will enjoy it and you will ask questions. The event is happening via Zoom and is being live streamed on YouTube, as you can see. And you will be able to ask questions via the chat box, which is enabled. So please do ask questions. If you would like to ask a question to a particular panelist, then please do so. You are equally welcome to pose a question to the entire panel. And I will pose questions at irregular intervals once the initial presentations have been, discussion has gotten underway, and we can carry on the discussion that way. Please do ask questions. We're always very keen to hear from our audiences. If you are the kinds who tweet, then please do tweet. All Twitter handles are given in the descriptions that you see on the YouTube channel. So please do tweet. And I should add here, especially for the benefit of those who have not attended any of our online events earlier, that had this event been happening on site at LSE, then LSE's rules and regulations for public events allow for members of the audience to ask questions without revealing their identity. In keeping with that spirit as closely as possible, when I ask questions, I will not be reading out the names of the people who have asked questions. I'll simply be posing the questions. Even though on YouTube, often the names of those who are asking is visible, but I will not be reading them out. I just wanted to say that. We have had a very, very quick discussion before we came live on air to decide the order in which the panelists will speak. And it is now my very pleasant duty to introduce the panelists of this afternoon's event. And we will proceed in that order. Dr. Ayesha Jehangir is currently lecturer in journalism and communication at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, is at the moment research fellow at the Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin, and author of the book to be discussed today, Afghan Refugees, Pakistani Media and the State, The Missing Piece, which is published by Routledge in 2024. Our first panelist who will speak after Ayesha has spoken is Dr. Sanaa Alimia, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at the Aga Khan University here in London and author of Refugee Cities, How Afghans Changed Urban Pakistan, which was published in 2022. Dr. Syed Irfan Ashraf, if you would turn on your camera, then everyone can see you, is Assistant Professor of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Peshawar and author of The Dark Side of Journalism, The Culture and Political Economy of Global Media in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which was published in 2023. Irfan has kept his camera off because there is a problem with the internet connectivity, but for the moment it's on so all of you can see him. Dr. Sonja Kretzschmar is Professor of Innovation in Journalism at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich and co-editor of Innovation in Journalism, Theories, Methods, Potential. I was told by my committee to say that there is a question mark after potential. The book is published in German and therefore has a German name, which I'm not reading out because I'm afraid I don't know German. It was published in 2024. Our discussant for this afternoon is my colleague at LSE, Dr. Omar Al-Ghazi, who is Associate Professor of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics, specializing in the geopolitics of global communications, especially in relation to news media and popular culture. Everyone, welcome to this afternoon's event. Before we begin, I'd also like to formally thank Routledge, Australia, and Mr. Stephen Heath, who made available copies of the book for all panelists to read ahead of this discussion, for which I'm very grateful. Ayesha is going to speak first. She has about 10 minutes where she will talk about the main arguments of her book, after which we will invite each panelist to make their initial remarks, approximately 6 to 8 minutes, after which we will have the discussion. So, Ayesha, the floor is yours now. You have about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Nilanjan, and thank you everyone who's watching, and specifically the panelists. All of you, your work has informed a lot of my understanding and knowledge about what I write and how I think. So consider me the most junior on the panel right now. And Nilanjan, thank you for this wonderful postmortem of my book. I think it's great to do that at this point. I want to start with the acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Badigal, the Gadigal, and the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional owners of the lands where each campus of UNSW is situated in Australia. I support the Uluru Statement that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of Australian continent and its adjacent lands, and that First Nation sovereignty has never been ceded or extinguished. I am an uninvited settler on these stolen lands. I want to start with the disclaimer, and I think, Nilanjan, you've already talked about as well, is that this book is not about social anthropology or migration studies. In fact, it sits at the intersection of media, politics, and society, but primarily deals with journalism and and media communication, in that re-theorizing peace journalism as a deliberative practice in journalistic witnessing using the case studies of Afghans in Pakistan. I first conceptualized this research, which is basically based on my PhD research, when I was working as a journalist in Afghanistan, working for Pakistani Media. And so I saw the discrepancies of how facts are reported as fiction or fiction as fact. So this book is my very first attempt at a detailed inquiry into the hegemonic structures of reporting that govern the framing of Afghan refugees in the Pakistani English language media. It is an investigation into the practice and prevalence of peace-oriented narratives in Pakistani media in their reporting of Afghan refugees, but also of Afghanistan and the politics between Pakistan and Afghanistan more broadly. It is, as I see, as an invitation to the reader to think about the role of media in creating knowledge that they have about, or reinforcing or internalizing the knowledge that they have about Afghan refugees as the people of that very land. I've tried to show how the weaponization of narratives occur through the media, but also how the repositionality of an ethnic and national identity is engineered at the convenience of the media that belongs to the oppressor or is in control of the oppressor. It also extends more broadly the knowledge on media framing, adding a few new frames to the discussion on how refugees around the world are framed by media of the host country, but particularly between neighboring countries such as Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I start with some context about the historical love and hate relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and then I compare the status of Afghan refugees during the military dictator under the military dictator Ziaul-Haq in the 1980s, and then I later also focus on how they were represented under other military and civilian governments. I then move on to the theorization of peace journalism as a deliberative practice, creating, in the words of Judith Butler and Lily Kuliraki, a field of perceptible reality within which the public is given an opportunity to respond to stories about human suffering, requiring journalism and subsequently journalists to step outside the normative imperatives that typically govern the reporting of human sufferings in the context of war and conflict, but also post-conflict societies. I write, and I'm going to quote myself here, even though more work is needed for peace journalism to play a role in improving people's capacities to act on news, nonetheless, it has, to an extent, improved the quality of public reasoning and dialogue, offered options to deliberate over, and in the words of Rosen, how a community might grapple with and not only read about its problems. So the embodiment of duty and purpose, the teleological and the deontological roles of peace reporting or journalism is crucial to peace reporting from war and conflict zones and directly facilitates the process of deliberation, which is a concept that is central to the book. I present peace journalism as a reporting practice that values recognition through transparency and accountability, becoming a form of journalistic resistance that challenges dominant power constructed and power proposed narratives and also perspectives, of course. In this part of the book, I also link peace journalism to a form of journalism that may encourage public engagement, which is strengthened by the concept of cosmopolitan solidarity, which I very briefly touch upon in this section of the book. And then I go on to distilling non-peace and peace frames, such as the terrorist frame, the enemy frame, the blame frame, which have been used in literature before me as well, but also the ethno-nationalist frame, which is quite particular or to this context, to the context of Pakistan and Afghanistan, or even within these countries where ethno-nationalism is prevalent. I here also play around a little bit. With Foucault's idea of counter-truths in a news system, in a news media ecosystem that is influenced by political parallelism. And then I go on to and then I move on and write about the implicit fragmentation. Not to say that all forms of journalism that is produced in Pakistan about Afghan refugees is war-oriented or dehumanizing, although it is most of the times. But I also talk about emerging peace-oriented frames, calling it or introducing the concept of cautious peace journalism, which I define as a safe zone where journalistic morality meets journalistic discretion under an authoritarian system of media governance. And then I go on talking about some emerging peace-oriented framing, such as empathy, sympathy, admission, confession, and also social justice. So towards the end of the book, I propose two significant turns in peace journalism application. First is recognizing the role of digital witnessing in informing investigative peace journalism, challenging a single perspective. And then I also argue for the need to widen the lens of journalistic investigation to include, in addition to the epicenter, the hypocenter of violence as well. And here is when I propose the concepts of victim-centric cosmopolitanism and perpetrator-centric cosmopolitanism. I'm particularly interested in the ways and also the extent in which citizen-driven acts or citizen journalism which is informed through social media, informs in turn peace journalism practice and reinvigorates the diminishing significance of peace journalism, which has historically dependent on mainstream reporting, but current war and conflicts in the world have shown us how this has changed because of access issues as well. So I finally conclude with the argument that while peace journalism may not necessarily possess the capability to resolve this protracted conflict over 4 decades, more than 4 decades, in different forms and shapes, it certainly holds the potential to enhance the quality of lives of Afghan refugees in Pakistan by bringing their voices from the peripheries to the mainstream, and while also shedding light on the underreported or neglected aspects of the AFPAC or the Afghanistan-Pakistan conflict. I have made many propositions in this book, but I think that's quite standard for a first-time author. And some of these I am furthering in my current empirical and theoretical interventions of peace journalism and conflict reporting. So yeah, I hope I haven't crossed my 10 minutes, but I wasn't keeping an eye on my time.
Oh, thank you very much. No, not at all. Thank you. That was absolutely great. And I hope we will get to hear a bit about what your current research is about later on in the discussion. For the benefit of those who have joined since Ayesha began to speak, I'd just like to introduce her one more time. As the author of the book being discussed this afternoon, Dr. Ayesha Jehangir is lecturer in journalism and communication at the University of New South Wales in Sydney and is currently research fellow at the Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin and author of Afghan Refugees, Pakistani Media and the State, The Missing Piece, which was published in 2024. I'm delighted to welcome our first panelist, Dr. Sanaa Alimia. Sanaa is Associate Professor of Political Science at the Aga Khan University here in London and author of Refugee Cities, How Afghans Changed Urban Pakistan, which was published in 2022. Sanaa, you have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nilanjan Sarkar at the LSE, and thank you very much, fellow panelists and audience members, and of course, a very special thank you to Dr. Ayesha Jehangir. Many congratulations on your work, which has brought us here together today. My own work on Afghans in Pakistan is a people's history of the 40 years displacement in the contexts of war. And oftentimes writing and researching on this particular topic has felt like a lonely journey. So it is heartening to be here with Dr. Jehangir, who has produced a much needed study of the discursive political framings of the Afghan story in Pakistan and how these framings are constructed by the Pakistani media and its growingly intimate relationship with the state and its political and military elites. Oftentimes we find academic and journalist stories on the peoples and geographies of Afghanistan more broadly, including in its displaced diaspora, are told through tropes. The medical anthropologist Anila Dolatzai and the historian Shah Mahmood Hanifi have respectively called this an exceptional Orientalism, where colonial ghosts and presence mix together to haunt the lives of Afghanistan and the peoples of Afghanistan in very real, material, psychic, and cosmological terms. We've seen reams of literature within the academy, within journalism, and in popular discourse being produced on Afghanistan, a country that is almost hyper-visible when it comes to conflict, whether it be the Soviet-Afghan war to the rise of the Taliban 1.0, the war on terror, the Taliban 2.0, we often find narratives that read almost like schoolboy fantasies of hyper-masculinized counterinsurgency battlegrounds or the geostrategic imperatives of war. And in other cases, we are confronted with tropes of the Muslim/Afghan/Pashtun woman needing to be saved from the so-called masculinities of the Afghan Pashtun Muslim man. This is despite the fact that we've had numerous interventions from scholars ranging from Leila Abu Lughod, Sabo Mahmoud, Charles Hirschkin, Sadia Tour, and Anila Dolatzai, who show us how the need to save is less about the women themselves, and more a discursive tool to manufacture consent to justify military campaigns. In these varied writings, we also find that there is no real examination as to why perpetual war in Afghanistan and the displacement that it has created is a reality. But a cursory look at the facts would show us that violence in the country is not simply an internal Afghan affair, but a direct consequence of external interventions by imperial powers from the Soviet Union to the US, to the UK, to the EU, and of course, neighboring interventions from regional actors, including Pakistan. Dr. Jehangir's work importantly speaks very much to this. Their work is a project that seeks to undo these tropes that shape Afghan stories in the context of Pakistan. And what Dr. Jehangir also does is pay specific attention to the how of these stories being constructed in the context of Pakistan, showing us how a political and military elite construct both the territories of Afghanistan and the refugee population within the country as a problem, how they pressurize media outlets and journalists to toe the party nationalistic line. All the while, we find, and as I was reading the book in the media narratives that are uncovered, the state and its elites either strategically ignore their own role in creating violence in the region, and even Pakistan itself, and don't really question why people are refugees in the very first place. As Dr. Jehangir mentioned in her opening statement, part of the book, in particular in chapter 3, we are taken to the front lines of media journalism and reporting, where Afghan refugees are placed in these negative frames, either as terrorist frames, enemies, or subjects to be blamed. And it becomes very clear that the contexts of displacement and violence are never really things that are discussed or brought to media attention. Instead, we have so-called negative news stories that are often not well evidenced, Dr. Jehangir tells us, that lead the front lines and headline newspapers. We also are told that there are very few positive stories on Afghans. In my own work, I would perhaps caution against the binary of positive or negative stories or discourse, whether in journalism or academia, partly because I feel that the role of the intellectual, as well as political and moral obligations, ask us to tell stories of those who are oppressed or in marginalized positions, not necessarily through prisms of positivity or negativity or contributions to the economy or constructions of the perfect victim to elicit this empathy. Rather, for us as scholars, or for those with a critical perspective towards journalism, our role is perhaps to unearth the bigger picture. That is, what are the material and historical conditions that have shaped the stories of the marginalized? This is, of course, something that Dr. Jehangir's writings do speak to. Referring to the Afghan refugee on page 28 of the book, we hear that the Afghan refugee within the context of Pakistan is very much a politicized entity. How they're framed is very much a symbolic representation between a political and military elite and vulnerable groups, and how they are constructed in negative ways. I would also urge us to perhaps also consider telling the story of Afghan refugees, as well as other refugee and migrant groups, not necessarily through their own stories in negative or positive ways, but stories through in a language of rights, or rights and how they're often denied. In the context of Pakistan, 40 years of displacement and over 40 years of war, in actual fact, millions of Afghans in Pakistan are no longer migrants, they're no longer refugees, but even in accordance to Pakistani law, should actually be citizens. Dr. Jehangir importantly shows us that it's very hard to raise these questions. And indeed, since the end of 2023, Pakistan has been characterized and deemed and actually demoted on a number of indices as an authoritarian regime on the rankings of political freedom. Journalists, opposition parties, dissidents, as well as the general public have been targeted via military courts, detention without trial, and enforced disappearances. Dr. Jehangir's work then is an important intervention to show us how we can speak truth to power. In other words, this practice of deliberative practice that Dr. Jehangir talks about through peace journalism is very much about asking the journalists and the professionals and the media practitioners, how is it that one can speak truth to power? And through their work, Dr. Jehangir effectively documents how media spaces have increasingly been pressurized, been silenced, including those good journalists who are trying to speak out, or how in other cases, through capital and through the state, have been co-opted to tell the stories that are deemed acceptable. In this way, Dr. Jehangir's work is important, and it's bigger than simply how newsrooms report on Afghans in Pakistan. And in this moment, we know that reporting honestly and speaking truth to power is, of course, deadly. In the past few hours, live bullets we know have been used on the streets of Islamabad. Meanwhile, in other contexts beyond Pakistan, in Gaza, in the occupied Palestinian territories of the West Bank, in Lebanon, we know hundreds of journalists, at least 137 journalists and media workers have been killed since October 2023. And this is to say nothing of those who have engaged in self-reporting through social media channels, such as Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, and the others. So my questions then for Dr. Jehangir, considering these tensions and difficulties that good journalists face, as well as editorial newsrooms face, how can we learn about politics and power through these examples? What are some of the challenges that people face? And in their own experiences of journalism and scholarship and merging these two together, how has the situation changed, deteriorated, or worsened during her processes of research and examination on these topics? I also think that the question that has been raised, and is an important one that was being emailed in, on why we don't have Afghans on the panel, we also do need to recognize that we should be able to create spaces for Afghans who have been born and raised or lived most of their life within Pakistan. And this is certainly a challenge that many of us who work within this field and who may not be of Afghan origin need to continue to create the spaces and room for as well. So I would like to congratulate Dr. Ayesha Jehangir and welcome, looking forward to hearing your responses and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanaa. That was brilliant. I'm sure we'll come back to these questions once all our other panelists have spoken, but thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Syed Irfan Ashraf, who is Assistant Professor of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Peshawar, and author of The Dark Side of Journalism, The Culture and Political Economy of Global Media in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which was published in 2023. I should caution members of the audience that there is a problem of internet connection where Dr. Ashraf is at the moment. So just in case the connection goes away, he will come back, but we will continue with our discussion. Dr. Ashraf, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nilanjan. I hope you hear me. I'm also very delighted to read Dr. Ayesha Jehangir's book, and I'm very happy to be as a panelist with other distinguished authors. Alimia, Dr. Alimia, she is also here, and assalamu alaikum to all those who are hearing. I like the way Dr. Jehangir treats the media coverage of the refugee crisis as a component of a larger structural argument, showing that the state policy plays a key role in creating this challenge. This wider approach enables the author to link the cross-border Taliban network to the context of Pakistan's geopolitical design aims at controlling Afghanistan. So from this structural perspective, the book is an original work, something that only an insider could do. And I value it because I'm also an insider and I know where the feel comes from. So when I was reading it, I was having this feel that some insider is writing this book. Methodologically, because of my interest in journalism research, I also liked how the author applies peace journalism as a framework and combines critical discourse analysis and framing theory. I have a bit of a bias because working in a critical theory, I don't believe in peace journalism or like public journalism or these kind of things. But the way I believe that it's more important that the way academics use these frameworks. So there is no problem in the frameworks. Rather, the benefit is the way we use it so we can make it more interesting. Using this methodological techniques expands the horizons of Ayesha Jehangir's viewpoint and enable the book to examine the issue from a broader academic vantage point. I wish the book could have explained how critical discourse analysis was connected to framing, and why these devices were used in combination instead of depending on a single method, and also what theoretical benefits was achieved by doing so. Keeping in view that the book is an academic resource, this clarity would have benefited other researchers as well, and I hope Ayesha may also explain it later for a student like me. As far as the context is concerned, true to its structural approach, the book also offers a rich empirical context though the author has already mentioned that the book is not offering in-depth analysis of the data's context. Still, the book rigorously connects the Afghan refugees crisis to the wider challenge of racism, especially in the European countries. The way the assault on women in Germany in 2016's New Year celebration led German press to label it the Islamic rape of Europe articulates the way the framing of refugees is mainly connected to the broader political issue of Islamophobia. So by linking this small-scale and large-scale racism, the book explains well that the refugee crisis is not limited to Pakistan only. And here would my critique also started, but here we also need to know that the political surrounding, the politics surrounding the Afghan refugees in Pakistan is glaringly different from Europe. In moving from one context to another, the book's reader must know how this difference works. In Pakistan, for instance, politics around refugees are not just used as a weapon for power grabbing or hate speech, as it is the case in Europe, but this politics is literally taking the lives of refugees in the most violent form possible. The method is to extract value from the refugees' bodies by creating hyper-precarious conditions around them. I mean, camp-like life. Suicide bombing is one example. These embodied attacks are largely carried out by Afghan refugees or displaced Pashtuns living in camps established for internally displaced families. These refugees and displaced people are being used in assault against civilians and rival parties. The whole system of militancy is built around the figure of the Afghan refugee as Mujahid and displaced Pashtun as a suicide bomber. Almost every refugee camp in Pakistan has its own graveyard. At least I can show this in Jaluzai case, where you can see miles and miles long graveyard there from Al-Qaeda to Taliban and Mujahideen. You can find people who are there lying in the graves. Even the Taliban's control of Kabul in 2021 was not possible without this jihadi infrastructure. Pakistani media is participant in this officially patronized cross-border violence labor market, and thus use distraction as a device to divert public attention. So in the end, I would say that what I have said so far is not meant to criticize the author or the book. Instead, it is a critique of media focused on media-centric approaches, basically, that do not provide a powerful vocabulary or conceptual clarity to analyze the bigger picture critically. The way the mainstream media in Pakistan covers issues like the Afghan crisis is not just a compulsion of the state policy, but we need to focus on the media's agentic role itself, which makes the urban media a part and parcel of the state's deathly geopolitical design. So in the end, I would appreciate the contribution of this book, but at the same time, I hope Dr. Jehangir in her future work will also enrich our understanding of the challenges, not only in what is there in text, but also what is hidden behind the text in more depth. She would look into it, exploring how the mainstream Pakistani press framed the issue of Afghan refugees and their forced return to Afghanistan is not only a humanitarian issue. Rather, I would also argue that that it is also a political and security challenge which is threatening the stability of the entire region. I will recommend the following groundbreaking resources for future research on this subject. I was looking that maybe I should have quoted some of these, but I'm just saying in case if Ayesha is trying to extend her work in future. I think Fazl Rahim's Marwat book, From Muhajir to Mujahid, is a very important book. We cannot ignore it. Simply Tasneem Malik, she is another writer. I was reading her work. She's a student of my colleague. She did her PhD with her, Foucauldian Biopower, a case study of securitizing Afghan refugees in Pakistan. It's a very important PhD contribution. Aurangzeb Khan's Human Rights Commission report is very important. Afghan refugees in Pakistan, push comes to shove. There is another book which has recently come, and that is Naked, Don't Fear Water. I think that is the name of the book. And there are a few other sources. I can show it later on, but I'm just saying thanks to Dr. Ayesha for working on this very important topic. I hope in future, if she continue working on this line, she would also consult all these resources, which are very important to let us know something more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irfan. You're very welcome to criticize Ayesha. I think that is part of the purpose of this event, is to engage critically with the book. But thank you very, very much, despite the problems of your internet connectivity. Our final panelist is Dr. Sonja Kretzschmar, who is Professor of Innovation in Journalism at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich and co-editor of Innovation in Journalism, Theories, Methods, Potential, with a question mark at the end, which was published in 2024. The book is in German with a German title. I've only read the translation. Professor Kretzschmar, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel, and also thank you for Ayesha Jehangir for writing these books, which really, I think, enriches academic discussion about peace journalism. What I really liked about the book is, first of all, that it's very well written. I think it's something which comes from your journalistic career, that it's easier to follow, and you really use pictures, and the empathy and the being in refugee camps comes to be obvious, is being obvious when reading the book. The thing which is new, I think, about connecting peace journalism and deliberative practice is going beyond Galtung and his two-sided peace war and peace reporting and war reporting, taking into account deliberation from once Judith Butler also, but also from Habermas, to looking what a deliberative public sphere could be and what sense can make peace journalism. I think this is something new and very interesting about the discourse about what a public sphere can do and what it can make out of it. You then do content analysis about frames and peace journalism is done in Pakistani Media. And this is a part of a real strength, a real line of analyzing media coverage about is there peace journalism found in it. Normally, all this analysis only come to a deficit analysis, that the authors find out that the ideal of peace journalism is not found in the normal reporting of crisis. So this was a thing to expect, but I think it's rather new and therefore innovative to go further and also look at the other side. Where are the, I really like the word cautious peace reporting. What are the silent or the little signs that there's another kind of reporting, although Pakistan is as it was already said, very, very dangerous country for journalists. So they face very hard dangers in reporting and going against mainstream media. So I really like to have this not only stopping with the deficit analysis, but also with these cautious peace frames and the background, looking at the background, not only at the news. And what is really interesting then, I think it's also the frames you found, insider, outsider, which is in line with in-group, out-group discussions we witness in reporting about refugees all over the world. But then we have the digitization opening up new ideas and new potentials of breaking through the difficult situation of being in an autocratic and difficult country, and nevertheless finding possibilities to have another kind of reporting. So when you pick these two cases out of Kabul airport and Afghanistan children in jail, I think you really worked out very well what you mean by ethical listening and a kind of witnessing practice. That means that social media do open up new forms of showing the situation on the ground, being done by citizens on their own, or by brave people being in Pakistani jails and smuggling out pictures from a difficult and oppressed situation. So this opens up the door for new possibilities, and you further this that we have a professionalization of witness testimonials. I think this sums really good up that it's after a first wave of loading up social media content and being surprised about this and that getting more professional and editorial offices, we have social media managers who verify and take into account these new voices and check them, and for the best taking them into account to make a step against what you call manipulative silence. Something I was really interested in the expression, because one thing is to analyze the things which are written, but the other thing is analyze the things which is not written about. That means the suffering and the people on the ground, and acknowledging that the silence is not a peaceful silence, but perhaps a silence of screams not heard. So as we have this turn in your social media innovative form of reporting, you also focus about this child as a global figure, and then I think you really have a good point in bridging the way from the discussion about Afghan children, and also Ayaan Kurslisi, the child being photographed so many times in Europe as a Syrian refugee, and covering this and the popularity, this picture as a kind of icon from the refugee coming and is perhaps dying on the way out of a threatening surrounding. How much power comes from these pictures and these stories? If it's only a kind of piece for future, is a thing perhaps to be discussed, because political changes came after this popularity of the picture, and the refugee routes are closed after this to avoid pictures like this, but doesn't solve the problem at all. There's still suffering, and it's only avoiding getting pictures like this, which may also silence the problem which is there. So summing up this social media, digital witnessing, and citizen testimonials, you also add OSINT research, which I think it's also a new form, an innovative form of using data analytics and computational science methods to find out what you can say is the truth or more truth, or a multi-perspectivity of reporting about a situation, which is undermining the oppression or the threat being done to journalists saying something or writing about things which are not wanted, or which are facing oppression in their countries as Pakistan. So summing this together, you say it's the aim is to have an impactful cosmopolitan reporting approach, which I think it's an interesting term. because it sums together a lot of straits where you laid your theoretical basis already. It's about Kant as a German philosopher of Weltbürgertum. It's a kind of cosmopolitan citizenry, as you say. And the important thing, it's not only telling the truth, but also to be impactful. That means that getting things done for a change. So I think the idea is quite impressive that we have these new innovative forms of digitization helping to have a new way of showing suffering of people in very difficult situations to a global public, and then getting something out which you call deliberation, recognition, but also resistance. And there would be a question of mine. I get this thing of deliberation as a mean of public sphere talking for a better solution for these situations, to end suffering, to bring an end or a better future for the people. This would be, I think, something which can only take place if you face a problem and make it visible, to say there is this injustice and there is this suffering. So the second step is to recognize it and to ask also these questions about why are the people in this situation and which way can we get them out of it. But the question I would have, and perhaps going into the discussion, is it a very direct way for showing suffering and recognizing the difficult situation of people to having a form of resistance, which is not only journalistic resistance, what I think it would be another step to political resistance. Is it normal to go this? Is it a self-running process? Or is there a gap between this deliberation, recognition, and then a question, where can we get, or who should get politically active for resistance against this situation, and which way could be a way to make situations better and end suffering?
Thank you very much. That was great. We've come to the end of our three panelists' comments. How shall we do this now? We had agreed, Ayesha, that you would respond, but I was thinking as we were getting on with the comments from various panelists, if we bring Omar in now, and Omar can give his comments, and then you can respond, and then Omar can carry on with the discussion, so you can deal with all the comments. Does that make more sense? Yeah, okay. Omar, would you like to come in and give your comments now for about 6 to 8 minutes? Dr. Omar Al-Ghazi is Associate Professor of Media and Communications here at the London School of Economics, specializing in the geopolitics of global communications, especially in relation to news media and popular culture. Omar has kindly agreed to be the discussant, but he will also, of course, have his views on the book. So shall we just split your role, Omar, and you sort of
well, now I don't have any choice, so
yeah. Okay. You wear one hat and then you come back wearing another hat.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for inviting me as well to be on this panel and to join this exciting conversation on your book, Ayesha, Dr. Jehangir, which is really a valuable contribution, I think, to thinking about peace journalism and critically engaging with what that concept means within the context of Pakistan, Pakistani media, and Afghan refugees. And I'll be speaking more from a global communication scholar. And I think part of the value of the book, and perhaps of this conversation, and how to take this forward as well in all our works, is that it grapples with an un-Western context. And I say this first of all because while most literature is on refugees in the West, we know actually that in terms of refugee movements around the world, or even migrant movements, is not within the West, but in places like Pakistan, in places like Turkey. So you know, in terms of an analytic, I'm thinking how this book also speaks to contexts that would study, for example, Zimbabwean migrants in South Africa, Syrians in Turkey, Sudanese in Egypt, Venezuelans in Mexico, like these kind of understudied contexts of how refugee movements are happening, and they are, in terms of absolute numbers of where people are moving, they are absolutely crucial. But the way we theorize them as scholars, we work with concepts and tools that are often not formulated in relation to these contexts and situations. And here, like when I was reading, and also now in the discussion, I'm thinking about basically the use of key concepts that are also not theorized in relation to these geographies. So if we start, for example, with witnessing, because like the way that you discuss witnessing is also in relation to listening. But witnessing is such a loaded term. It's not simply seeing. It's also, it has this moral weight behind it that comes from a particular European post-war legal framework and cultural and political sensibility. And I think so I would be also thinking about, like, in a context like Pakistan, how does witnessing function in the sense of what is the cultural expectation of acknowledging suffering? What is the political effect of that? Is it how can we think of conceptualize witnessing from that context? Is it meant to rouse publics in a certain way? Is it to maybe, like, even there are maybe Islamic notions that are brought up in relation to witnessing, religious texts that are used to basically move people to act or in a different way, to be more hospitable, etc. So, like, what is the modality of witnessing there? And I think this is an interesting moment to think about that, because I think, Sanaa, you mentioned also Gaza and Lebanon, and certainly a lot of us are questioning what witnessing, like, you know, what is even the media aspect of witnessing has always, like, there was always this assumption that the problem is in lack of documentation or lack of seeing, and there's an assumption that once we see, we act, and now we see where we've come to kind of really the end of that assumption, because now we're bombarded by images of suffering and of genocidal violence that Palestinians are subjected to, without that leading to political action. Moving on from witnessing, one aspect that I also appreciated about the book is that it's not just descriptive of a problem, that there's also like an orientation for normative thinking, which I think is important, because a lot of the time critiques and kind of like deconstructive kind of thinking moves us away from a way of thinking that's actually practical, particularly when it comes to journalism. So I do appreciate the thinking with deliberation as well, and kind of like there is potential, I think, with this book, is even to have perhaps a more practical guide to thinking about what peace journalism is, and maybe like a toolkit of some sort for that would be helpful for journalists. Thinking about deliberation as well, again with that inheritance from Habermas, from kind of also like this Western canon of communication. Again, to think about the way that it works, particularly in global South context, and also in relation to technology and how social media, for example, disrupts that. I know, I'm familiar with the Middle East. I know that the social media play a crucial role, and I think now we see it in Europe as well, a crucial role in basically setting the media agenda and media tone, even enforcing a particular media tone on journalists, and the ability of foreign actors to also kind of influence the media system of another. So there's kind of like that complication, that complex technological media circulation aspect that is difficult to map out. A lot of the time, we position journalists as kind of key figures, or maybe the main figures in shaping that narrative, and calling on them to kind of find ways to incorporate different values in their reporting. But I think there are many other actors that kind of are also crucial, and mapping out that formulation of how a tone in media, in mediation, we can say, in the mediation of a story happens. And finally, I'll also mention the notion of peace as well, which again, I think has been, particularly when it comes to peace journalism, has been theorized from the West with the assumption that it would be about others, that this is what, places where war happens, places where war is inherent to how life takes place. This is kind of like a way to think of it. Not there are. I'm maybe here generalizing a bit, but I think at least in the way that it's taken up by a media development organization, if you follow the money of where peace journalism is funded, that's also how it happens. So at a moment where a lot of what was assumed to only happen in the global South is also happening in the global North, in terms of division of societies, lack of a collective national identity, very, very hostile and toxic media environment that's very divisive, dehumanization of others within society, and also honestly, like particularly now in relation to Gaza, like a complete failure in journalism in upholding the values of human rights, and even in the very kind of minimal notions of truth and good reporting and peace, really. And here, like the question that I kind of to wrap up is also to think about theorizing from a different perspective what this might mean. And here I end also with the final question about justice rather than peace. I think you do mention justice in the book. There, you talk about it, and I think in different parts. But I like, well, maybe I could just phrase it as how do you think justice compares to peace in relation to journalism? Justice, because it goes more into the realm of accountability rather than simply peace as an abstract value. So I'll stop here, and again, thank you for the book and for joining us together in this very exciting conversation.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you very much. Ayesha, would you like to quickly respond to at least some of these many very interesting points and comments? I'd say you have 1 minute, but you can take up to 5.
Thank you. Thank you for your insightful questions, all of you. Most of what you've asked was something that I had already started thinking about even before I finished the book. For instance, at the end of this, writing this chapter at Cosmopolitanism, I was thinking, why is cosmopolitanism a colonial projection of ideas? Why do we have to be cosmopolitan in our practice? So I think that's the standard of going through a writing process. I'm reading a book by Susan Sontag regarding the pain of others, and she writes about that our failure is one of imagination, of empathy. I think I'm going to quickly try to wrap around my thoughts around all these questions. Is that I think the challenges are political, because peace is a very political term, but peace is also a process. It cannot happen over time, and so cannot peace journalism. So over the last few months that I've engaged with more literature and in my own research, I've realized that maybe peace journalism does not work in active war and conflict situation, and that it will, because it needs deliberation, and deliberation cannot happen overnight. Sanaa talked about the challenges, and I think I've listed some here. Disinformation and misinformation is a challenge. Manipulation of social media is a challenge. Political polarization is a challenge. In Pakistan, the media is more or less like a corporate and military industrial complex. It's part of that. So it's an extension of the power dynamics that are imposed on the public. And so I think, and one of the ways it can successfully be practiced is through independent journalism. And I do not like using the word alternative media, which is a part of another research that I'm doing. But through agency, and also Umar bringing witnessing in a way where I'm trying to simplify the concept here. I was asked about, Irfan asked me about the theoretical benefits of, and I think, yes, there were some limitations, because this was part of my PhD research, which I later added a chapter to, the last one that Sonja was talking about. I think the very fact that it presents peace journalism as a practice that decolonizes journalism practice and conflict reporting within itself is a theoretical contribution. I do present also in my current work peace journalism as a practice that decolonizes conflict reporting, because who's interested in peace? Where is peace most needed? And narratives of peace are more needed. And I think, as Umar also mentioned, and that I also talk about in the book, is that not all refugees head to the West. They first head to the countries that are right across them. And Pakistan is the largest host, is the host for largest number of refugees. So some of my work in terms of theoretical benefits also goes on to extending the application of peace journalism knowledge or as a theoretical intervention into cross-border collaborative peace journalism as well, of how of this can happen within that area. I also am working on theorizing peace journalism as a public sphere. It's funny that you mentioned Habermas, Umar. So as a public sphere where debates are happening, again, bringing some of these ideas that are actually applicable. I think where I talk about witnessing, basically all I'm trying to argue here is that if I oversimplify the arguments, although any discussion about peace journalism or peace for that matter, it's impossible to simplify it. It's a complex process, and which leads to complex discussions about it. I think peace journalism in the simplest form is an invitation to bear witness. Simple. Look at this. Can you see this? How do you see this, and what are the connotations around that witnessing? I understand it's an entire area of investigation. It's like the difference between hearing and listening. Yes, you're there, you're hearing, but are you listening to me? And then the ethical sides. So more or less, it is a journalistic reform into representational, the hierarchies that Lili Kuliraki has extensively, most brilliantly written about, the hierarchies of representation or the regimes of representation. Kate Wright's and Mel Bunce's book, The Humanitarian Journalist, here is also very interesting. Although they do talk about humanitarian crisis and the reporting of it, it does come down to representation and the presentation, the invitation for the public to look, this is happening. What are we going to do about it? Maybe that's something that cannot happen. And that's why I talk about empathy in voice and empathy in action as well. I did collect. Irfan also talked about framing and discourse analysis. I thought I'd spent quite some time in talking about how framing studies and critical discourse analysis is linked, but towards the end of the book, I realized that we need to have different forms of collecting information, especially now that the social media is part of information dissemination, so important. And I think I did get into, and I did engage into some studies of and collecting data through APIs, which unfortunately is not possible if you're not a very rich researcher. So that's so not only the practice of peace journalism has challenges, research on peace-oriented narratives is also becoming very challenging for researchers as well. So I don't know if I covered everything, but of course, I'm more than happy to take this conversation offline later as well. But where I want to end this is with my argument about that at this point, a reform through peace journalism, which again does not only mean stopping wars, but also an extension to justice. Yes, peace. The Juan Galtung talks about the fact that the absence of war does not make peace, and that the next step is justice, where accountability comes and transparency comes and making lives better comes. But unfortunately, we have seen that it's not working in Israel's war on Gaza. We see that that citizen journalism is taking action. But again, there's shadow banning. I mean, there are many doors for researchers and journalism practitioners, but then there are doors that are closing on them as well, which of course pushes us to unpack these ideas in a different form, but also research them through different aspects as well. For example, at this point, I am also looking at the role of journalists in exile, the role of data journalism, the role of immersive journalism in trying to address that compassion fatigue that comes from bearing witness in a very direct form of what's happening on the ground, which is in itself becoming such a big problem, access to information. So I think at this point, I am trying to present peace journalism as a counter narrative to the fact that reporting practices at this point shows us what war is doing, as if almost this is the way of waging war. This is how you should wage war, instead of asking the public to think about it, deliberate about it, and also, again, develop a public sphere where an exchange of ideas happen in a way where power narratives or manipulation of information or ideas can be challenged, which I understand is very difficult. But the global surveillance capacity of modern media and communication systems and networks, I think it provides an unprecedented opportunities for ordinary citizens and also researchers to bear witness to scenes of human suffering and atrocities that are recorded and filmed and uploaded, despite of shadow banning, and of course acknowledging the considerable risks to those who are filming. I here want to remind everyone to please read Umar al-Ghazi's and Lili Kuliragi's work on flesh witnessing, which is something that is absolutely amazing piece of work. So it's just a process. I'm trying to figure out how it works and how it doesn't work, try to theorize it as well. But political economy of global media, or in fact, the political economy of Pakistani media, is definitely something that will always create a hindrance in people's access to truthful information, but also people's agency in telling their own story in their own words.
Thank you very much. Omar, would you like to come back and
I think if we open it up for questions at this point, it will be more enriching.
Sure. Others, everyone else, anyone wants to add to the discussion, to what has been said? I'm going to say only one thing, which I say out of interest, Ayesha, because as you know very well, I am in no way even remotely an expert in this field, but I am a historian and I've studied the Indian subcontinent in the 13th and 14th centuries, at a time when Afghan presence in that land was not only very prominent, but also very different. And historically, especially in the 19th century, in writings of British colonial officers, and including travelogues, but also administrative writings, there is a stereotype of Afghans in the subcontinent. And that's not a particularly positive stereotype. And I was wondering, I read your book from cover to cover, and it was very, very interesting. I could only learn from it. But I was wondering whether sometimes the representation, the imagery, the imperative of engagement with Afghans as a category is in any way conditioned by unconscious bias that people may have inherited from a wider cultural, historical, stereotypical image of what they have had, rustics, of being barbaric, of being uncivilized, of being martial, and so on and so forth. There is a string of things that make up that basket of images. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, on whether unconscious bias plays a role in how one engages with. Just as I was very struck by the fact that when we're talking about refugees, obviously people of one country in another country, it's how frequently the word refugee is followed by the word problem. It's always very interesting to see how quickly that idiomatic language falls into place. But before that, anyone else wants to come in? Sanaa, do you want to say anything else? Or in response to what Ayesha said? Or anything else that you didn't say?
Sorry, thank you so much. Sorry, I lost connectivity there for a moment. But I think it's the overall discussion has been really important and really interesting to draw out. I think the only thing that I would probably emphasize is that I think that the things that I found and the aspects of Ayesha's storytelling that I found the most interesting and the most relevant to kind of complicate the stories of kind of how, stories of speaking to power are told, were when we were hearing on the case studies and the groundwork in more detail. I think sometimes kind of foregrounding that more than kind of the concerns around the framings of how we imagine, how we construct.
Gallery view now.
And sorry, so I was just saying that that I believe that I think the most important aspects of Ayesha's research, which I would really encourage them to kind of foreground, is rather than necessarily just the theoretical framings and understandings of things, is to foreground the stories that we're hearing from the journalists and the media rooms on the ground. That for me was certainly the more kind of interesting parts of the work that Dr. Ayesha kind of engaged with, rather than the kind of theoretical framings. I would also really encourage our imaginings and our conceptualizations of the Pakistani state to move beyond kind of like this idea of something that is just, a state operating within an international system in the kind of positivist framings of how we kind of like imagine states to be. We are still very much operating in a colonial-esque context when it comes down to the Pakistani establishment. So understanding how these power dynamics work become really, really important. But I also think that the broader story that Dr. Ayesha's works is kind of in conversation with, and which is kind of what Dr. Omar Al-Ghazi is kind of like bringing out, is that these are stories of kind of, what does it mean to kind of like create new spaces where new discourse and new stories can be told? What do we mean about kind of operating in context of violence? And I think foregrounding that becomes a really important part of kind of, writings in very much continued colonial or imperial contexts. Thank you.
Nilanjan, can I just add very, very briefly?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Sanaa, for that. I think it's very interesting. I just want to bring attention to how the Pashtun ethnicity is now reported in Pakistan right now because of the protest that's going on, and the arbitrariness of the relentless stereotyping of the Pashtun identity, which is one of the ethnic populations, for those who don't know, in Pakistan and the largest in Afghanistan, is that, because Pashtuns are barbaric, look at them, you call them, they come and they set the capital on fire, and so I think that's where I'm reminded of Nico Carpenter's writing about not only a radical otherness of the enemy is emphasized, but the enemy is also considered to be a threat to your own identity. So now it's not just the Afghans, but now the Pashtuns, most of whom stand alongside this relentless stereotyping of Afghans. They are also looked at as a collective, and this is the collateral damage that Afghan refugees, Afghans or Pashtuns have had to face in both sides of the railroad line. Yes, there are preconceived biases for sure. I think I am. I admit that this is a human behavior, but to have informed decisions or informed understanding or shaping of identity, I think that the journalism really plays an important part. I mean, I've got so many other examples that are coming to my mind, but I'm also cautious of time here. Yeah.
Sure. Omar, you were shaking your head, nodding. So, and you want to say something?
Can I say something?
Yes, Irfan, please do. Sonja, please come in when you want to.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, the very term refugee and journalist are how they are connected. For example, immigrants or refugees, like how the refugee term emerged up till 1950s. There are experts on the panel, they would know better than me, that basically it was a term where in Geneva Accord it was used where communists were not there, and second, that most of from East Europe, when those people were coming, so they were called refugees. In each country has its own context, but when we say refugee now, we have to understand it in three contexts: the absence of political rights, the absence of juridical rights, and the absence of the rights to speak for themselves. In Pakistani's context, just look, Pashtun journalists emerged before the Afghan war. Pashtun journalists were not in high position. Mostly journalists in Peshawar or in the in these bordering regions, they either used to come from Lahore, Islamabad, or Karachi, because they were saying Pashtuns can't speak Urdu properly, so they cannot be good journalists. There were here and there, but in bureau chief positions, so there were no journalists, and we were not having our own media. Why I'm saying this, that in 1980s, when the Afghan war started, so this issue of the right to speak for the refugees brought in the first generation of Pashtun journalists, because the allied forces or the Pakistani state, the US, the Saudis, and when they were sending petrodollars money, they found the need to humanize the stories of the Mujahideen. And this is how Pashtun journalists emerge. Now look, after 45, 50 years, when I'm speaking to you right now, we don't have Pashtun media in Peshawar. Like local media, we have it, but it's very tightly controlled. Most of the media in Pakistan is urban media, either in Karachi, Lahore, or Islamabad. So all those refugees who are there on the, like even when I'm talking to you, so in Islamabad, Imran Khan's party is there and they are being shelled. And right now, the Interior Minister is saying that from December 31st or 30th, no Afghan refugee would be allowed to stay in Islamabad anymore. So Imran Khan's issue has been connected to Afghan refugees right now, which means that all those journalists who fled from Afghanistan and taking refuge in Islamabad, waiting for their visas to get out of the country, they are living in a very highly precarious situation. It's not just Afghan journalists. Thousands of Afghan refugees are waiting for their visas over there. So who is going to be punished? Those people who don't have the political, the juridical right, and the right to speak for themselves. And these are the refugees. So I think on the one hand, when journalists can't speak for them anymore, on the other hand, refugees are the worst categories which is being emerging, where nobody can speak for them.
Sonia, did you want to say something?
Yes, for me, it's very interesting to listen to the comments of my former speaker, because his nuances are not familiar with me. So I'm learning a lot, which is very interesting, and also showing to me the engagement and the how to say emotions which are beside the word who is Pashtun and who is not, and who is speaking Urdu properly and who is not speaking Urdu properly. So but commenting perhaps from another point of view, as I'm also a project leader of the Media for Peace project, which is looking at which is dealing with new possibilities of peace journalism in conflict areas. So I would like to ask Ayesha, what do you think would be the future of the decolonization of conflict reporting? Are there any chances for a new phase of peace coverage, peace reporting on conflict zones?
Thank you very much. I was actually going to make a point very briefly in passing, only because I can't resist making the point. I don't even necessarily expect an answer, but this is when Irfan used the word immigrant along with refugee. And Sonia, you're talking about decolonization. I mean, I'm sure we've all noticed that there are some foreigners in some countries who are never immigrants and never refugees because they're only expatriates. So it is also a question of what is the language we have inherited and the language we have become so used to using, and what are the images that they generate in our minds about the population that we are talking about. Very highly educated, highly skilled people in other countries can still be called migrants, whereas less skilled people in another country may not necessarily be called migrants, but only be called expatriates, depending on what your nationality is. So there is that as well. But Ayesha, before you answer, we have about 5 minutes more, but Omar, did you want to say anything else?
I'll give the floor to Ayesha. Maybe if there's time, I'll add something at the end.
Okay, Ayesha.
Thanks, Sonia. I am actually presenting a talk at Sonia's University tomorrow, so probably we'll go into this in detail. But I think when I talk about or when I do propose peace journalism as a way of decolonizing journalism, I think it's mostly aimed at telling a story of human suffering from a Western journalist's point of view. That does not mean that I want to exclude a foreign or a Western journalist from telling the story of human suffering from the majority world. Not at all. But there's more focus on agency, self-determination. Who, as I said earlier, who gets to tell their story and in what words to. So, in fact, one of the my Weizenbaum Institute fellowship that I'm here for in Germany deals with how journalists who are in exile are reconfiguring symbolic borders to tell their stories from their homeland. And I think that's where the decolonization of peace journalism or conflict reporting, I would say, comes. And I think I offer two insights into the functions and impacts, and I call it, and I think by now all of you know that I'm a big fan of labeling everything, or maybe it's the academic in me, is targeted peace journalism. When it is targeted, or it has a mission, or I mean something that I'm again with a question mark, like Sonja's, for instance, what if journalism is done only to report on human suffering in a certain context? So it's about the perpetrator, the oppressor. And again, Lily Kuliaraki's recent book, Wronged, talks about these reorientations of the definition of who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. Highly recommended book. So my two insights into the work that I'm doing here at Weizenbaum right now presents peace journalism as a journalistic intervention that decolonizes journalism, and by challenging historical colonial attitudes and power dynamics that continue to, as I've mentioned earlier, shape contemporary media structures and reporting of conflict and war in the majority world. And the second insight suggests journalistic self-determination, which affords marginalized voices from the majority world, say journalists who have now become refugees, to speak of the Afghan refugees in exile in Germany, for instance, and presents them or affords them an opportunity to reclaim agency in how to tell their story. So from these stories of human suffering, and from the object of journalism, it changes into the subject of journalism. I can go on into detail with this, but hopefully you'll have to wait for the next chapter that's coming on, as journalism as a form of resistance and resistance and resilience. Yeah, so that's something to talk about later. Yes.
I like these forms of cliffhangers for the next point. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. We've, I'm afraid, reached the end of our time schedule. I would just like to thank all of you, Ayesha, Jehangir, for writing the book, but equally importantly, Sanaa Alimia, Syed, Irfan, Ashraf, Sonja Kretzschmar, and Omar Al-Ghazi. All of you have taken the time to read the book, to comment, and to participate in today's discussion. This is why we do these events, just so that we can have these wonderful discussions. I also say, for all of those who do watch our events regularly, I say this at the end of all the events I do, that very little good came out of the pandemic, but the one thing that did come out good was that academics became savvy with technology. And we all learned how to use Zoom. And as a result, we've all learned how to be able to convene these kinds of gatherings. And that helps a lot in making these discussions available publicly to whoever is interested to watch now or later. But from the LSE South Asia Center, everyone, thank you very much and goodbye.